Margaret Chen had always been the one with the plan. At 50, she could look back at her life and see the careful progression of decisions that had led her to become the vice president of marketing at one of Seattle's most prestigious advertising firms. Her corner office overlooked Elliott Bay, and her calendar was filled with client meetings, strategy sessions, and industry conferences. She owned a beautiful townhouse in Capitol Hill, drove a sleek BMW, and had a retirement portfolio that would make any financial advisor proud. But plans, as Margaret had learned, sometimes leave little room for the unexpected twists of the heart. The morning that would change everything started like any other Tuesday in March. Margaret woke at 5:30, went through her usual routine of yoga and meditation, prepared her signature green smoothie, and reviewed her presentation for the afternoon's client meeting. She had perfected this rhythm over decades, finding comfort in the predictability of her well-ordered life. Her younger sister Linda had been calling more frequently lately, always with the same underlying message wrapped in concerned sisterly love. "Maggie, you know you don't have to do everything alone, right?" Linda would say during their Sunday phone calls. "There are still good men out there. Maybe you should try one of those dating apps again." Margaret would always respond with the same patient explanation. She had tried the dating apps 3 years ago, after her 47th birthday, when her mother had made one too many comments about grandchildren at the family Christmas dinner. The experience had been a series of awkward coffee dates with men who either seemed intimidated by her success or assumed she was desperate enough to settle for anyone willing to overlook her age. One memorable date had actually asked her if she was still capable of having children, as if she were a piece of machinery with an expiration date. After that particularly humiliating evening, Margaret had made peace with the idea that romance simply wasn't in the cards for her anymore. She threw herself into her work with renewed focus, took solo trips to places she'd always wanted to see, and cultivated friendships with other successful women who understood that happiness didn't require a partner's validation. The irony was that Margaret had never actually been opposed to love. In her 20s and 30s, she had been in several serious relationships. There was David, the environmental lawyer who had wanted to move to Costa Rica to work with sea turtle conservation projects. Margaret had been climbing the corporate ladder at the time and couldn't imagine stepping away from her career trajectory. Then came Michael, the gentle professor who had proposed after 2 years together. Margaret had said yes initially, but as the wedding planning progressed, she realized they wanted fundamentally different lives. Michael dreamed of a quiet existence in a college town, hosting dinner parties and raising children. Margaret thrived on the energy of the city, the challenge of high-stakes business deals, and the satisfaction of building something significant in her professional world. Each relationship had ended amicably, with both parties recognizing that timing and life goals matter as much as love. Margaret had no regrets about choosing her career, but she also couldn't deny that there were moments, usually late at night when the work was done and the house was quiet, when she wondered what might have been different. Her friends and family had different theories about why Margaret remained single. Her mother, a traditional woman who had married at 22, believed Margaret had been too picky and career-focused. Her father, who had always been proud of his daughter's achievements, thought men were simply intimidated by successful women. Linda was convinced that Margaret had built walls around herself after her relationships ended, making it difficult for anyone to get close. The truth was probably a combination of all these factors, plus the simple reality that finding genuine connection becomes more complex as you age. People in their 50s carry decades of experiences, preferences, and non-negotiable standards. They know what they want and what they absolutely won't tolerate. This clarity can be a blessing, but it also narrows the field considerably. Margaret had made peace with this reality. She had a rich, fulfilling life. She mentored young professionals at her company, volunteered at a local literacy program, maintained close friendships, and traveled extensively. She had learned to enjoy her own company and had stopped seeing solitude as something that needed to be fixed. That Tuesday morning, as she prepared for another day at the office, Margaret had no idea that her carefully constructed world was about to be turned upside down by a chance encounter that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, timing, and the courage required to embrace the unexpected. The first hint that this day might be different came when her assistant, Jennifer, buzzed her office with an unusual request. "Margaret, I know this is last minute, but my brother's fight got moved to tonight, and I have an extra ticket. I know it's not really your scene, but would you maybe want to come? I hate going to these things alone, and my usual fight buddy just cancelled." Jennifer was 28, energetic, and had been working as Margaret's assistant for 3 years. She was efficient, intelligent, and had become something of a younger sister figure to Margaret. Jennifer often invited her boss to various events, concerts, art gallery openings, trivia nights, most of which Margaret politely declined. She preferred quieter entertainment and had never seen the appeal of watching people hit each other for sport. But something about Jennifer's expression suggested this invitation meant more than usual. Margaret had been working particularly long hours recently, preparing for a major product launch, and she realized she hadn't done anything social in weeks. Jennifer was always reliable and never asked for personal favors, so perhaps Margaret owed her this one evening of stepping outside her comfort zone. "What kind of fight?" Margaret asked, looking up from her computer screen. "Mixed martial arts. My brother Danny has been training for months for this bout. It's at a small venue downtown, nothing too crazy. But he's worked so hard, and it would mean a lot to have people there supporting him." Jennifer's enthusiasm was infectious, and Margaret found herself considering the possibility. Margaret had never attended any kind of sporting event beyond the occasional Mariners game for client entertainment. The idea of watching people engage in physical combat seemed barbaric to her refined sensibilities. But Jennifer had covered for her countless times, staying late to finish projects and handling difficult clients with grace. One evening of supporting her assistant's brother seemed like a reasonable gesture of appreciation. "What time does it start?" Margaret asked, surprising herself. 7 o'clock. It's at the Emerald Queen Arena downtown. I promise it won't be too long, and we can leave early if you're not enjoying it." Jennifer's face lit up with genuine gratitude. Margaret glanced at her calendar. Her last meeting was scheduled to end at 4:30, which would give her time to go home and change into something more appropriate for a sporting event. She couldn't imagine attending a fight in her usual business attire. "All right," she said, feeling slightly reckless. "But I'm warning you, I might be the most out-of-place person in that entire arena." Jennifer beamed. "Thank you so much, Margaret. I promise you won't regret this." As Margaret turned back to her computer, she had no way of knowing that Jennifer's brother Danny had been having his own conversation about taking chances and stepping outside comfort zones. At 28, Danny Rodriguez had been fighting professionally for 5 years, working his way up through smaller venues while training as a personal trainer during the day to pay his bills. Danny was preparing for what could be the biggest opportunity of his career, a fight that might catch the attention of larger promotions and change his trajectory in the sport. But, on this particular Tuesday morning, he wasn't thinking about career advancement or athletic achievement. He was thinking about how lonely the success felt when you had no one special to share it with. Unlike Margaret, Danny's romantic challenges had nothing to do with age or societal expectations. He was young, athletic, and had never lacked for attention from women. But most of the women attracted to him seemed more interested in the idea of dating a fighter than in getting to know the thoughtful, introspective man behind the physical prowess. They wanted the excitement and drama they imagined came with his profession, not the reality of early morning training sessions, strict diets, and the mental discipline required to compete at a high level. Danny had recently ended a 6-month relationship with a woman named Casey who had initially seemed different. She was a nurse, intelligent and caring, and had seemed to understand the demands of his training schedule. But, as their relationship progressed, it became clear that Casey was attracted to the idea of him rather than the actual him. She wanted to post photos of them together at events, enjoyed the attention that came from dating a fighter, but showed little interest in his thoughts about life beyond the cage. The breakup had been amicable but left Danny feeling more isolated than ever. He was beginning to wonder if he would ever find someone who could see past the surface to appreciate the depth he had to offer. His sport required him to be aggressive and focused, but outside the cage, Danny was gentle, thoughtful, and surprisingly romantic. He read voraciously, enjoyed cooking, and had a secret passion for old movies and jazz music. As Tuesday evening approached, both Margaret and Danny were preparing for what they expected to be just another ordinary night. Margaret was changing from her business suit into dark jeans and a simple blouse, feeling slightly ridiculous as she tried to imagine what one wore to a fight. Danny was going through his pre-fight routine of meditation and visualization, focused entirely on the technical aspects of the upcoming bout. Neither of them had any idea that fate was about to intervene in the most unexpected way possible, setting in motion a love story that would challenge every assumption about age, compatibility, and the mysterious timing of the heart. The stage was set for an encounter that would prove that love doesn't follow society's rules or respect conventional wisdom about who belongs with whom. The evening that would change both their lives forever was about to begin. The Emerald Queen Arena was nothing like what Margaret had imagined. She had pictured something brutal and primitive, perhaps a warehouse with folding chairs and the smell of stale beer. Instead, she found herself in a modern venue with proper lighting, comfortable seating, and a surprisingly diverse crowd. There were young men in athletic wear, but also families, couples on dates, and even some elderly fans who clearly knew the sport well. Jennifer led them to seats in the third row, close enough to see everything clearly but not so close as to feel overwhelmed by the intensity. Margaret settled into her chair, clutching her small purse and trying not to look as out of place as she felt. She had chosen her outfit carefully: dark jeans, a simple navy blouse, and her most casual shoes, but she still felt overdressed compared to the t-shirts and hoodies around her. Danny's fight is the fourth one tonight, Jennifer explained, consulting the program. The first few are amateur bouts, so they'll be shorter. This will give you a chance to get used to how everything works before Danny's match. Margaret nodded, studying the program with the same attention she brought to quarterly reports. Each fight listed the competitors' records, weights, and fighting styles. The terminology was foreign to her: to submissions, takedowns, striking versus grappling, but she found herself oddly intrigued by the strategic complexity that seemed to underlie what she had assumed was simple violence. The first fight began, and Margaret was surprised by how technical it appeared. The two young men moved with obvious skill and training, each trying to impose their game plan on the other. There was aggression, certainly, but it was controlled and purposeful. The crowd cheered knowledgeably, calling out encouragement and reacting to subtle shifts in momentum that Margaret was only beginning to recognize. By the third fight, Margaret found herself leaning forward in her seat, asking Jennifer questions about what she was seeing. "Why did he do that instead of punching?" she asked when one fighter chose to grapple instead of strike. "He's probably more comfortable on the ground," Jennifer explained. "Every fighter has strengths. Some are better strikers, some are better wrestlers. Part of the strategy is getting the fight to take place where you have the advantage." Margaret was fascinated by this concept. In her business world, she was used to playing to strengths and minimizing weaknesses, but she had never considered that physical competition might require similar strategic thinking. As the fourth fight was announced, Jennifer grabbed Margaret's arm excitedly. "This is Danny. The one in the blue shorts." Margaret looked toward the entrance and saw a young man making his way toward the cage with focused intensity. Danny Rodriguez was not what she had expected. Yes, he was obviously athletic and strong, but he moved with a grace that reminded her more of a dancer than a brawler. He was shorter than she had imagined, perhaps 5'8", with dark hair and surprisingly gentle eyes that seemed almost peaceful despite the circumstances. As Danny entered the cage, he went through a series of stretches and movements that looked almost meditative. There was no posturing or intimidation tactics, just quiet preparation. Margaret found herself studying his face, noting the intelligence in his expression and the way he seemed to be running through mental checklists rather than psyching himself up for violence. "He looks so young," Margaret murmured, not meaning for Jennifer to hear. "He's 28, but he's been training since he was 15. He's actually one of the more experienced fighters on tonight's card," Jennifer replied proudly. 28. Margaret did quick math in her head. When Danny was born, she was already 22 and starting her first real job after college. The age gap hit her with unexpected force, though she couldn't understand why she was even thinking about it. This was just a sporting event she was attending to support her assistant. There was no reason for her to be considering this young man in any personal context. The fight began, and Margaret watched with growing admiration as Danny displayed remarkable skill and composure. His opponent was larger and tried to use aggression to overwhelm him, but Danny remained calm and technical. He moved with economy and precision, never wasting energy or losing focus. When the opportunity presented itself, he secured a submission hold that ended the fight in the second round. As Danny's arm was raised in victory, Margaret found herself applauding enthusiastically. There had been something beautiful about watching someone execute their craft at such a high level. It reminded her of the satisfaction she felt when a marketing campaign came together perfectly, each element working in harmony to achieve the desired result. "Come on," Jennifer said, standing up as the crowd began to disperse for intermission. "Let's go congratulate Danny. He always comes out to the lobby area after his fights to thank people for coming." Margaret felt a flutter of nervousness that made no logical sense. She was simply going to congratulate a young athlete on a job well done. There was nothing unusual or complicated about that. Yet as they made their way through the crowd toward the lobby, she found herself checking her appearance in her phone's camera and wishing she had worn something more flattering. Danny was near the merchandise table, still in his fight shorts but now wearing a simple t-shirt. He was talking to what appeared to be family members, an older woman who was obviously his mother, based on the resemblance, and a man about his age who might have been a brother or cousin. Despite having just finished a physically demanding fight, Danny looked relaxed and happy, his face animated as he described some technical aspect of the match to his relatives. "Danny!" Jennifer called out, and he turned toward them with a genuine smile. "Jen! You made it!" Danny hugged his sister warmly, then looked curiously at Margaret. "Danny, this is my boss, Margaret Chen. Margaret, this is my brother Danny." Danny extended his hand with a smile that was both confident and humble. "Nice to meet you, Margaret. Thanks for coming out tonight. I hope it wasn't too brutal for someone new to the sport." Margaret was surprised by his voice, warm and articulate, with none of the aggressive edge she might have expected. His handshake was firm but gentle, and his eyes met hers directly without the cockiness she associated with young male athletes. "Congratulations on your victory," Margaret said, finding her professional composure. "That was really impressive. I have to admit, I came in knowing nothing about mixed martial arts, but you made it look like art form." Danny's face lit up with genuine pleasure at her comment. "That's exactly what it is," he said enthusiastically. "Most people see the violence, but really it's about problem solving under pressure. Every opponent presents different puzzles to solve." Margaret found herself drawn into the conversation despite her initial intention to offer polite congratulations and leave. "That's fascinating. In my work, we're constantly adapting strategies based on what our competition does. I never thought about fighting in those terms. What kind of work do you do?" Danny asked, and Margaret realized he was genuinely interested in her answer, not just making polite conversation. "Marketing. I'm vice president at Morrison Kemp Associates." She watched for the glazed-over look that often accompanied this revelation, but Danny's attention remained focused. "That must require incredible strategic thinking," he said. "Reading people, anticipating their reactions, staying several steps ahead of the competition. Sounds like we might have more in common than you'd think." Margaret was struck by his insight. Most people, especially young people, tended to view her job as either boring or intimidatingly corporate. Danny had immediately grasped the intellectual challenge and competitive aspects that drew her to the field. Jennifer had been pulled into a conversation with Danny's mother, leaving Margaret and Danny talking alone. She should have felt awkward, a 50-year-old executive chatting with a 28-year-old fighter, but instead she found herself surprisingly comfortable. Danny asked thoughtful questions about her work and listened attentively to her answers. When she asked about his training regimen, he explained the mental discipline required with the same passion she might use to describe a successful campaign launch. "How did you get into fighting?" Margaret asked, genuinely curious. Danny's expression grew more serious. "I was getting into trouble as a teenager. Nothing really bad, but I was angry about a lot of things and didn't have good ways to deal with it. My uncle brought me to a gym when I was 15. The training gave me focus and discipline. The sport taught me that real strength comes from controlling yourself, not from dominating other people." Margaret was impressed by his self-awareness and the maturity of his perspective. At 28, he seemed to have a clearer understanding of himself than many people twice his age. "What about you?" Danny asked. "How did you end up in marketing? Was it always the plan?" Margaret laughed. "Nothing was ever really the plan. I studied business because it seemed practical, but I discovered I loved the creative problem-solving aspect. Every campaign is different, every client presents unique challenges. I suppose I'm attracted to complexity." "That makes sense," Danny said thoughtfully. "You seem like someone who would get bored easily with routine work." His observation was surprisingly accurate. Margaret had always been drawn to the most challenging accounts and the most difficult problems. She had turned down several opportunities for easier, higher-paying positions because they would have meant less intellectual stimulation. As their conversation continued, Margaret became aware that something unusual was happening. She was talking to this young man as if he were a peer, someone whose opinions mattered and whose insights were worth considering. There was no condescension in his manner toward her age and no deference to her professional status. He treated her simply as an interesting person worth getting to know. For his part, Danny found himself captivated by Margaret's intelligence and passion for her work. She had a way of explaining complex ideas that made them accessible without talking down to him. Her enthusiasm for the strategic aspects of her job reminded him of his own feelings about the technical side of fighting. More than that, there was something about her presence that felt both sophisticated and genuine. The conversation might have continued indefinitely, but Jennifer reappeared with the reminder that they should probably head home. It was getting late, and Margaret had an early meeting the next morning. "It was really wonderful meeting you, Margaret," Danny said as they prepared to leave. "I hope you'll come to another fight sometime. Maybe I could explain more about the technical side." "I'd like that," Margaret heard herself saying, surprising them both. As she and Jennifer made their way to the parking garage, Margaret tried to process what had just happened. She had come to the fight as a favor to her assistant and had ended up having the most engaging conversation she'd had in months with someone young enough to be her son. The age difference should have made meaningful connection impossible, but somehow it hadn't felt relevant during their interaction. "Danny really liked you," Jennifer said as they reached Margaret's car. "I haven't seen him that animated talking to someone in a long time. He's usually pretty reserved around new people." Margaret felt a flutter of something she refused to name. "He seems like a very thoughtful young man. You're lucky to have such a close relationship with your brother." As she drove home through the quiet Seattle streets, Margaret couldn't shake the memory of Danny's smile or the way he had listened to her with such genuine attention. She told herself it had simply been a pleasant encounter with an interesting person. There was nothing more to analyze or consider. But, as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of her perfectly organized bedroom, Margaret found herself thinking about strategic thinking and problem-solving and the way Danny's eyes had lit up when she described the intellectual challenges of her work. For the first time in years, she fell asleep thinking about someone other than quarterly projections and campaign deadlines. 3 miles away, in his small apartment near the training gym, Danny was having his own sleepless night, wondering what it meant that the most interesting woman he'd met in years was old enough to have been his babysitter when he was born. He had dated plenty of women his age, but none of them had challenged his thinking or made him want to be more articulate about his passions the way Margaret had in just 30 minutes of conversation. Neither of them was ready to acknowledge what was happening, but something had shifted during their brief meeting. A door had opened to possibilities neither had considered, and, despite their logical minds insisting this was merely a pleasant chance encounter, their hearts were already beginning to whisper a different story. Margaret spent the next 3 days trying to convince herself that her thoughts about Danny Rodriguez were simply the result of meeting someone unexpectedly interesting in an unfamiliar environment. She threw herself into work with renewed intensity, arriving at the office even earlier than usual and staying later to review reports that didn't really need her immediate attention. But Danny kept intruding on her thoughts at the most inconvenient moments. During a client presentation about demographic targeting, she found herself wondering about the psychology of athletic competition. While reviewing budget allocations, she caught herself thinking about the discipline required to maintain fighting shape. She even found herself researching mixed martial arts during her lunch break, telling herself she was simply trying to understand a new cultural phenomenon. Jennifer noticed her boss's distraction but wisely didn't comment directly. Instead, she began casually mentioning Danny in their daily conversations. Danny said the fight really helped his confidence going into his next training camp, she would say while delivering Margaret's morning coffee. Or, "My brother was asking if you had any book recommendations. He's always reading between training sessions." On Friday afternoon, Jennifer knocked on Margaret's office door with an expression that suggested she had something specific on her mind. "Margaret, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but Danny wanted me to ask you something." Margaret looked up from her computer, trying to appear nonchalant despite the fact that her pulse had quickened. "What's that?" "He's fighting again in 3 weeks, but before that, he's doing a charity event tomorrow afternoon. It's a training demonstration for kids from the Boys and Girls Club. He thought you might find it interesting to see the educational side of martial arts, how it's used to teach discipline and confidence to young people." Margaret set down her pen and studied Jennifer's face. "Did Danny specifically ask you to invite me?" Jennifer smiled. "He did. He said he hoped it wouldn't be weird, but he really enjoyed talking with you the other night. He thought you might appreciate seeing how martial arts can be used for positive youth development, given your volunteer work with the literacy program." Margaret was surprised that Danny had remembered her mentioning her volunteer work. Their conversation had covered so many topics that she hadn't realized he was paying such close attention to the details of her life outside work. "Where is this demonstration?" she asked, already knowing she was going to say yes despite every rational voice in her head urging caution. "The community center in Ballard. It's from 2 to 4 tomorrow afternoon. Very casual, lots of families. Danny and a few other fighters volunteer there regularly." Jennifer paused. "I'll be there too, of course. And probably my parents. It's really a nice event." The mention of Jennifer's parents was both reassuring and slightly terrifying. Meeting Danny in a family context felt more significant than their brief encounter at the arena. But Margaret found herself nodding before she could overthink the decision. "That sounds educational," she said, maintaining her professional tone. "I'd be interested to see how martial arts principles apply to youth development." As Saturday afternoon approached, Margaret changed clothes 3 times before settling on dark jeans and a soft gray sweater that managed to look both casual and polished. She told herself this was simply another community event, similar to the literacy program fundraisers she regularly attended. The fact that she was spending an unusual amount of time on her appearance was merely because she would be meeting Jennifer's parents and wanted to make a good impression as her supervisor. The Ballard Community Center was bustling with activity when Margaret arrived. Children ranging from about 8 to 16 were gathered on mats in the main gymnasium, while parents and siblings filled the bleachers along the walls. The atmosphere was completely different from the arena, family-friendly, educational, and focused on positive youth development rather than competition. Margaret spotted Jennifer sitting with an older couple who were obviously her parents. They had the same warm, welcoming expressions that seemed to run in the family. Jennifer waved her over with genuine enthusiasm. "Mom, Dad, this is my boss, Margaret Chin." "Margaret, these are my parents, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez." Maria Rodriguez was a small woman with graying hair and intelligent eyes that immediately assessed Margaret with motherly interest. Carlos was a tall, quiet man who worked with his hands, based on their weathered appearance, and had the same gentle demeanor Margaret had noticed in Danny. "It's so nice to meet you, Margaret," Maria said, standing to give her a warm hug. "Jennifer talks about you all the time. She says you're the best boss she's ever had." "Jennifer makes my job easy," Margaret replied. "She's incredibly capable and thoughtful. And this is where she gets it," Carlos added with a proud smile toward his wife. "Maria raised all our children to think about others first." Margaret settled into the bleachers beside the Rodriguez family, feeling welcomed but also slightly overwhelmed by their easy warmth. She came from a more reserved family background where affection was expressed through achievements and practical support rather than physical hugs and emotional openness. Danny appeared at the front of the gym, wearing a simple black t-shirt and athletic shorts. He moved with the same calm confidence Margaret had noticed at the fight, but his energy was completely different now. Where he had been focused and intense at the arena, here he was relaxed and playful as he interacted with the children. "Welcome, everyone, to our monthly demonstration," Danny called out, his voice carrying easily across the gymnasium. "Today we're going to learn about respect, discipline, and using your strength to protect rather than intimidate." Margaret watched with growing admiration as Danny led the children through basic warm-up exercises, explaining the importance of physical fitness and mental focus. He had a natural teaching ability, breaking down complex movements into simple steps while keeping the children engaged with humor and encouragement. "Who can tell me what respect means in martial arts?" Danny asked the group. A young girl of about 10 raised her hand eagerly. "Treating other people the way you want to be treated?" "Exactly right, Sophia." "And how do we show respect in training?" "By listening to instructions and not hurting people on purpose," called out a boy who looked to be about 12. "Perfect, Marcus. Now, who knows why we bow before and after we practice?" Margaret found herself leaning forward, genuinely interested in the answers. She had always been curious about the philosophical aspects of different cultures and traditions, and she was beginning to understand that martial arts involved much more than physical techniques. As the demonstration continued, Margaret watched Danny work individually with children who were struggling with certain movements. His patience was remarkable, and he had an intuitive understanding of how to motivate each child based on their personality and learning style. When a shy young boy seemed intimidated by the larger group, Danny quietly moved him to the side and worked with him one-on-one until his confidence improved. He's always been like that, Maria said quietly, noticing Margaret's attention. Even as a little boy, Danny was the one who befriended the kids other children picked on. He has a gift for seeing people's potential instead of their limitations. Margaret nodded, filing this information away as another piece of the puzzle that was Danny Rodriguez. The more she observed him, the more complex he became. The young man leading this children's class bore little resemblance to the stereotype of a professional fighter. He was clearly intelligent, empathetic, and committed to using his skills for positive community impact. During a break in the activities, Danny approached the bleachers to greet the parents and answer questions about the program. When he saw Margaret, his face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Margaret! I'm so glad you could make it. What do you think so far?" "It's really impressive," Margaret replied honestly. "I had no idea martial arts instruction involved so much character development and philosophy." "That's the part most people never see," Danny said, sitting down beside her on the bleacher. "The fighting is actually a very small part of what we do. Most of our training is about self-control, respect for others, and building confidence through discipline." "How did you get involved in working with children?" Margaret asked. "This seems like a significant time commitment on top of your own training." Danny's expression grew thoughtful. "I remember what it was like to be a kid who felt powerless. My dad left when I was 8, and I went through a period where I was angry at everything and everyone. Martial arts gave me a way to channel that energy positively. Now I want to help other kids who might be struggling with similar feelings." Margaret was struck by his openness about his family background. Many people, especially young men, might have been reluctant to share such personal information with someone they barely knew. Danny's willingness to be vulnerable suggested a level of emotional maturity that surprised her. "That's very meaningful work," she said. "I can see why the children respond to you so well. You're giving them something much more valuable than just physical skills." "What about your literacy program?" Danny asked. "Jennifer mentioned you volunteer with kids who are struggling readers. That must be incredibly rewarding." Margaret found herself describing her work with the local elementary school, where she spent Saturday mornings helping children who were behind grade level in reading comprehension. As she talked about the breakthrough moments when a child suddenly understood a concept they'd been struggling with, she realized Danny was listening with the same intense attention he had shown at their first meeting. "It sounds like we both believe in helping kids build confidence through skill development," Danny observed. "Just using different approaches." "I never thought about it that way, but you're right," Margaret said. "There's something powerful about watching a child realize they're capable of more than they thought possible." Their conversation was interrupted when the children gathered for the final portion of the demonstration. Danny excused himself to return to his teaching duties, but not before suggesting that Margaret might enjoy visiting the literacy program sometime to see different educational approaches in action. As Margaret watched Danny work with the children for the final 30 minutes of the program, she found herself seeing him in an entirely new light. This wasn't just a young athlete with unexpected depth. This was a man who had thought seriously about his place in the community and was actively working to make a positive difference in the lives of young people. His commitment to service and his natural teaching ability spoke to values and character traits that transcended age. After the demonstration ended, the Rodriguez family invited Margaret to join them for coffee at a nearby cafe. Margaret's first instinct was to politely decline and maintain appropriate boundaries. But something about their warm inclusiveness and Danny's genuine enthusiasm for continuing their conversation made her accept. At the coffee shop, Margaret found herself in the midst of a lively family discussion about everything from local politics to travel plans. The Rodriguez family had a way of making complex topics accessible and finding humor in everyday situations. Margaret, who was used to more formal social interactions, found their conversational style refreshing and engaging. Danny sat across from her at the small table, contributing thoughtfully to the various discussions while occasionally asking her opinions on topics ranging from the effectiveness of different educational approaches to the challenges of small business ownership. Margaret realized she was having the kind of wide-ranging, intellectually stimulating conversation she rarely experienced even with people her own age. "Margaret, you should come to Danny's next fight," Maria suggested during a lull in the conversation. "It's going to be his biggest opportunity yet. A scout from one of the major promotions will be there." "Mom," Danny said with mild embarrassment, "Margaret might not be interested in coming to another fight." "Actually," Margaret said, surprising herself, "I think I would be interested." After seeing your work with the children today, I'd like to understand more about the competitive side of what you do. Danny's smile was radiant. Really? It's next Saturday night. Same venue as before, but this fight is much more important for my career. I'd love to have you there. As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Margaret realized she had spent the entire afternoon enjoying herself without once thinking about work, her age, or the appropriateness of spending time with someone so much younger. The conversation had flowed naturally, and she had felt valued for her thoughts and experiences rather than judged for her demographic category. Walking to her car, Margaret reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 1 week. 7 days ago, she had been convinced that her personal life was settled and complete. Now she found herself looking forward to a second fight and thinking about a young man whose company she genuinely enjoyed. The rational part of her mind was sending up warning signals about the potential complications of developing feelings for someone 22 years her junior. But, for the first time in years, Margaret found herself more interested in following her heart than in analyzing the logical risks of her choices. As she drove home through the Seattle evening, Margaret allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been avoiding all week. She was attracted to Danny Rodriguez not just physically, though she couldn't deny that component, but intellectually and emotionally. He challenged her thinking, made her laugh, and treated her with a respect and interest she hadn't experienced from anyone in years. The question now was whether she had the courage to explore these feelings, knowing that doing so would require her to step completely outside her comfort zone and risk the judgment of a society that had very specific ideas about age-appropriate relationships. Margaret had spent her entire life making safe, practical decisions. For the first time, she was considering the possibility that the most important choice might be the one that felt risky but right. The week leading up to Danny's important fight passed in a blur of internal conflict for Margaret. She found herself checking her phone more frequently, hoping for messages from Jennifer that might include casual mentions of her brother's training progress. She caught herself researching the career implications of winning or losing in mixed martial arts, telling herself she was simply being supportive of her assistant's family. By Wednesday, Margaret couldn't deny that her feelings were becoming more complicated than simple friendship or professional courtesy. She was genuinely worried about Danny's upcoming fight, not just because she hoped he would succeed, but because she cared about what the outcome would mean to him personally. This realization forced her to confront what she had been trying to ignore for days. She was developing romantic feelings for a man 22 years younger than herself. Margaret had always prided herself on being rational and logical in her decision-making. She analyzed problems systematically, weighed pros and cons, and chose courses of action based on likely outcomes rather than emotional impulses. But her growing attraction to Danny defied all logical analysis. On paper, they had nothing in common. She was an established business executive with a corner office and a substantial retirement portfolio. He was a young athlete living paycheck to paycheck while pursuing a career in one of the most unpredictable sports imaginable. She was approaching the peak of her professional achievement. He was just beginning to establish himself in his chosen field. Their life experiences were separated by more than 2 decades. When Danny was learning to walk, Margaret was finishing graduate school. When he was starting high school, she was already climbing the corporate ladder. They had grown up with different technology, different cultural references, and different generational perspectives on everything from career priorities to relationship expectations. Yet somehow, none of these obvious incompatibilities seemed to matter when they were actually talking to each other. Their conversations felt natural and stimulating. Danny's insights about discipline and goal-setting resonated with her business experience. Her perspectives on strategic thinking and long-term planning seemed to intrigue him. They both valued hard work, personal growth, and contributing positively to their communities. Margaret found herself wondering if their differences might actually be complementary rather than problematic. She had spent decades building financial security and professional credibility. Danny brought energy, passion, and a fresh perspective on life that reminded her why she had fallen in love with challenges in the first place. She offered stability and wisdom gained through experience. He offered spontaneity and the kind of intense focus that came from pursuing dreams without safety nets. But Margaret was also acutely aware of how their relationship would be perceived by others. She could already imagine the whispers at professional events, the assumptions people would make about her motivations and his intentions. Would colleagues think she was having a midlife crisis? Would Danny's friends assume she was trying to recapture her youth by dating someone inappropriate? The age difference also raised questions about long-term compatibility that Margaret couldn't ignore. If they were to seriously pursue a relationship, they would be navigating different life stages simultaneously. She was thinking about retirement planning and established career satisfaction. He was focused on building his reputation and achieving athletic goals that might require years of dedication. Could those different priorities coexist in a meaningful partnership? Even more concerning were the biological realities they couldn't change. At 50, Margaret's opportunity for having children had passed, while Danny was at an age when starting a family might naturally become important to him. She had made peace with her choice to prioritize career over motherhood, but would it be fair to enter a relationship with someone who might want children in the future? These practical concerns swirled through Margaret's mind as she prepared for Saturday's fight. She had chosen her outfit carefully again, dark jeans and a soft blue sweater that complemented her eyes without being obviously flattering. She told herself she was simply attending a sporting event to support Jennifer's brother, but she couldn't deny the extra attention she had paid to her appearance. At the arena, Margaret found Jennifer and the Rodriguez family in their usual section. Maria greeted her with another warm hug, and Carlos shook her hand with the quiet dignity she had come to associate with Danny's father. They welcomed her as if she belonged with them, making no reference to the unusual nature of her friendship with their son. "Danny's been looking forward to seeing you here tonight," Maria mentioned as they settled into their seats. "This fight is really important for his career. Having people who care about him in the audience means a lot." Margaret felt a flutter of something between pleasure and panic at being included in the category of people who cared about Danny. She was crossing invisible lines that she hadn't consciously intended to cross, but found herself unable or unwilling to step back. The preliminary fight seemed to pass more quickly this time, perhaps because Margaret was now familiar with the basic structure and could appreciate the technical aspects she had missed during her first visit. She found herself analyzing the different fighting styles and strategic approaches, drawing parallels to business tactics without fully realizing she was doing so. When Danny's fight was announced, Margaret felt her pulse quicken with genuine nervousness. This was more than just wanting to see an exciting athletic performance. She was emotionally invested in the outcome in a way that surprised her with its intensity. Danny entered the arena with the same calm focus she had observed before, but tonight there was an additional element of determination that was visible even from her seat in the third row. This fight represented a potential career breakthrough, and the weight of that opportunity was evident in his preparation and demeanor. His opponent was older and more experienced, with a reputation for aggressive striking and intimidation tactics. Margaret watched with growing concern as the larger man attempted to use psychological warfare during the pre-fight introductions, trying to unsettle Danny with staring and posturing. But Danny remained centered and composed, going through his pre-fight routine with the same methodical focus she had observed during the children's demonstration. He was clearly nervous. Margaret could see the tension in his shoulders and the way he controlled his breathing, but he channeled that nervous energy into preparation rather than allowing it to overwhelm him. The fight began with explosive intensity. Danny's opponent came forward aggressively, trying to end the match quickly with powerful strikes. For the first few minutes, Margaret found herself gripping the edge of her seat as Danny absorbed several significant hits while working to implement his game plan. But, as the fight progressed, Margaret began to see the strategic thinking that Danny had described to her. He was weathering the early storm while gathering information about his opponent's patterns and preferences. When the larger man began to tire from his aggressive approach, Danny shifted tactics and began to take control of the pace and distance. Margaret watched with growing admiration as Danny demonstrated the problem-solving skills they had discussed in their conversations. Each round, he made adjustments based on what he had learned about his opponent's strengths and weaknesses. By the third round, he had figured out the timing of the other man's attacks and was consistently countering with precise, technical responses. When Danny secured the victory with a submission hold in the fourth round, Margaret found herself on her feet cheering with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. The technical excellence of his performance had been impressive, but what moved her even more was watching him achieve something he had worked toward for years. As Danny's arm was raised in victory, his eyes searched the crowd until he found their section. When he saw Margaret among his family members, his smile became even more radiant. He pointed in their direction with obvious gratitude and joy. "He's so happy you're here," Jennifer said, noticing the exchange. "I don't think I've ever seen him this excited after a fight." Margaret felt her heart skip at the realization that her presence had contributed to Danny's joy in this moment of career triumph. She was no longer just a casual observer or family friend. She had become someone whose support mattered to him personally. After the fight, as they made their way to the lobby area to congratulate Danny, Margaret found herself walking beside Maria Rodriguez. The older woman seemed to sense her internal conflict and placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Margaret, can I tell you something as a mother?" Maria asked quietly. "I've raised 4 children, and I've learned to recognize when one of them has found someone special. Danny hasn't stopped talking about you since the night you met. Not just mentioning you in conversation, but really talking about the things you shared and the way you've made him think about his life differently." Margaret felt her cheeks flush with a combination of pleasure and embarrassment. "Maria, I hope you know that I would never want to create any complications or inappropriate situations. What I know," Maria said with warm firmness, "is that Danny is a grown man who makes thoughtful decisions about the people he invites into his life. And what I see is a kind, intelligent woman who has brought out a side of my son that makes him even better than he already was. Age is just numbers on paper. What matters is what's in here." She placed her hand over her heart. Before Margaret could respond, they reached the area where Danny was surrounded by well-wishers and media representatives wanting interviews about his victory. When he saw Margaret approaching, he excused himself from a conversation with what appeared to be an important industry figure and made his way directly to her. "Margaret, you came," he said, his voice filled with genuine happiness. "I can't tell you how much it meant to see you in the crowd tonight. Congratulations, Danny. You were amazing out there. I could see everything you told me about strategy and problem-solving happening in real time." Danny's eyes lit up with pleasure at her understanding. "Did you see how I had to adapt my approach when he kept moving to his left? That's exactly what we talked about, reading the situation and adjusting your tactics." As they talked about the technical aspects of the fight, Margaret realized that other people were beginning to notice their interaction with interest. She saw a few curious glances and whispered conversations among the crowd around them. For the first time, she became acutely aware that their obvious comfort with each other might appear unusual to outside observers. "Danny," interrupted a man with a press badge, "can we get a few photos for the sports blog? Maybe with your family and supporters?" Danny looked questioningly at Margaret, clearly wanting to include her but uncertain whether she would be comfortable being photographed in that context. Margaret felt a moment of panic as she realized that appearing in photos as part of Danny's celebration would make their connection more public and potentially subject to scrutiny. But, as she looked at Danny's hopeful expression and thought about the conversation she had just had with his mother, Margaret made a choice that surprised herself. "I'd be honored to be included," she said. As they posed for photos with the Rodriguez family, Margaret realized she had just crossed another invisible line. By allowing herself to be publicly associated with Danny's victory celebration, she was acknowledging that their relationship had moved beyond casual acquaintanceship into something more personal and significant. The photographer took several shots of the group, and Margaret found herself standing close to Danny with his arm around her shoulders in a gesture that felt both natural and terrifying. She was no longer protecting herself with careful boundaries or emotional distance. She was opening herself up to possibilities that felt both exciting and completely outside her comfort zone. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave the arena, Danny approached Margaret privately. "Would you maybe want to get coffee sometime this week? Not with the whole family, just the 2 of us? I'd love to continue some of the conversations we've been having." Margaret looked into his eyes and saw genuine interest, respect, and something that might have been the beginning of deeper feelings. She thought about all the logical reasons to maintain distance, all the potential complications and social judgments they might face. Then, she thought about the conversations they had shared, the way he had challenged her thinking, and the happiness she had felt watching him succeed tonight. "I'd like that very much," she said, taking the biggest emotional risk she had taken in years. As Margaret drove home through the quiet Seattle night, she realized her life had just changed in a fundamental way. She was no longer simply a successful executive living a well-ordered, predictable existence. She was a woman on the verge of a relationship that would challenge every assumption she had about love, timing, and the courage required to follow your heart when it leads you somewhere society doesn't expect you to go. Their first official date took place on a rainy Tuesday evening at a quiet coffee shop in the Fremont neighborhood, chosen specifically because it was unlikely they would encounter anyone from Margaret's professional circle or Danny's athletic community. Margaret arrived first, selecting a corner table that offered privacy for what she anticipated might be a complicated conversation about the nature of their growing relationship. She had spent the 3 days since Danny's fight victory in a state of constant internal debate. Her logical mind kept presenting compelling arguments for maintaining appropriate boundaries and protecting both of them from the potential consequences of pursuing something that society would view as unconventional at best and inappropriate at worst. But her heart kept returning to the memory of how natural and right their conversations had felt, how much she had grown to care about his success, and how alive she felt when they were talking together. When Danny walked into the coffee shop, wearing dark jeans and a gray sweater that brought out the warmth in his brown eyes, Margaret felt her pulse quicken with the same nervousness she remembered from first dates in her 20s. The fact that she was experiencing such familiar yet long-forgotten sensations at 50 struck her as both thrilling and slightly ridiculous. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come," Danny said as he sat down across from her, his own nervousness evident despite his attempt to appear casual. "I wasn't sure I would either," Margaret admitted with characteristic honesty. "This is all very new territory for me." Danny ordered a simple black coffee while Margaret chose chamomile tea, and they sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both recognizing that they were about to have a conversation that could change everything between them. "Margaret," Danny began, his voice serious but gentle, "I need to tell you something, and I hope it won't make you uncomfortable. I've been thinking about you constantly since we met. Not just as someone interesting to talk to, but as someone I'm genuinely attracted to and would like to get to know much better." Margaret felt her heart skip, both from pleasure at his confession and fear of where this conversation was leading. "Danny, I have to be honest with you about something too. I've been having the same thoughts, and it's been terrifying me. The age difference between us isn't just a number. It represents completely different life stages, different generations, different expectations about relationships and the future." "I know," Danny said, leaning forward intently. "I've thought about all of that too. But I've also thought about the fact that I've never met anyone who challenges me intellectually the way you do. I've never had conversations with anyone that make me think about my life and goals differently. Age doesn't seem relevant when we're actually talking to each other." Margaret studied his face, seeing sincerity and thoughtfulness rather than the impulsive romanticism she might have expected from someone his age. "But it will be relevant to other people, Danny. If we were to pursue this, we would face judgment from friends, family, colleagues. People will make assumptions about both of our motivations that could be hurtful and damaging. Are you worried about what people will think, or are you worried about whether this could actually work between us?" Danny asked perceptively. Margaret considered his question carefully. "Both, honestly. I'm 50 years old, Danny. I've had my career adventures, I've traveled, I've figured out who I am and what I want from life. You're 28. You're still building your career, still discovering yourself. What if what you think you want from me isn't what you'll want in 5 years? What if what I think I want is exactly what I'll want for the rest of my life?" Danny countered. "Margaret, I'm not some confused kid with a crush on an older woman. I'm a man who knows his own mind, and I know that I've never met anyone like you. Your success doesn't intimidate me, it inspires me. Your experience doesn't make me feel inadequate, it makes me want to be worthy of your respect and attention." Margaret felt tears gathering in her eyes at the sincerity of his words. "But what about the practical things, Danny? What about children? I can't give you a family if that's something you want. What about the fact that I'll be 60 when you're 36? What happens when I start showing my age and you're still young and vital?" Danny reached across the table and took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Margaret, first of all, you're one of the most vital, energetic people I've ever met. You have more passion for life and work than most people half your age. Second, I've thought about the family question, and I've realized that what I want is a partner who shares my values and challenges me to be better. That's what I've found with you. And third," he continued, his voice growing more intense, "I'm tired of dating women my age who seem more interested in my fighting career than in me as a person. I'm tired of relationships that feel shallow and focused on social media appearances. When I talk to you, I feel like you really see me, not just what I do or what I represent." Margaret felt something shifting inside her chest, a loosening of the careful control she had maintained over her emotions for so many years. "I do see you, Danny. That's what's been so surprising about all of this. You're not what I expected a professional fighter to be like. You're thoughtful and gentle and committed to making a positive difference in the world. You make me remember why I fell in love with challenges and new experiences in the first place. Then, why are we sitting here talking about all the reasons this won't work instead of exploring whether it might?" Danny asked softly. Margaret looked into his eyes and saw not only attraction and affection but also determination and maturity that belied his chronological age. She realized that her concerns about their age difference were based partly on assumptions about what 28-year-old men were like, assumptions that Danny consistently challenged simply by being himself. "Because I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "I'm scared of being hurt. I'm scared of hurting you. I'm scared of looking foolish. I've spent my entire adult life making safe, practical decisions. This feels like the opposite of safe and practical." "Maybe that's exactly why you should consider it," Danny suggested. "Margaret, you've built an amazing life for yourself. You're successful and independent and respected. But when I watch you at my fights or talking about your work, I see someone who's hungry for something more. Someone who's ready for the next adventure." Margaret felt a flutter of recognition at his words. He was right that she had been feeling restless lately, as if her carefully constructed life, while successful, had become too predictable and controlled. Meeting Danny had reminded her of the excitement that came from stepping outside her comfort zone and embracing uncertainty. "If we were to try this," Margaret said slowly, "we would need to be completely honest with each other about our expectations and concerns. We would need to take things slowly and see how we handle the challenges that will inevitably come up." Danny's face lit up with hope. "Are you saying you're willing to try?" "I'm saying I'm willing to explore the possibility," Margaret clarified, though she could feel herself smiling despite her attempts to maintain caution. "But, Danny, I need you to understand that this would be complicated. My professional reputation matters to me, and I would need to be thoughtful about how we present ourselves publicly." "I understand completely," Danny said. "I want to protect your reputation and your comfort level. We can take this at whatever pace feels right to you." Over the next 2 hours, they talked through the practical and emotional aspects of pursuing a relationship despite their age difference. Danny proved to be remarkably mature and thoughtful in his approach to the challenges they would face. He understood the professional considerations Margaret would need to navigate and was willing to be discreet while they figured out how their relationship might work. More importantly, as their conversation deepened, Margaret realized that the connection she felt with Danny wasn't based on novelty or rebellion against social expectations. It was based on genuine compatibility, shared values, and the kind of intellectual and emotional chemistry that couldn't be manufactured or forced. "Can I ask you something personal?" Margaret said as their coffee grew cold. "What do your friends think about your interest in someone my age?" Danny smiled ruefully. "Most of my friends are focused on partying and casual relationships. They don't really understand what I see in you, just like they don't understand why I spend so much time working with kids at the community center. But the people whose opinions matter to me, my family, my coaches, the guys I really respect, they've all noticed how happy I've been since I met you. My mom told me last week that I seem more focused and purposeful than I've been in years." "And your career goals?" Margaret asked. "How does pursuing a relationship with me fit with your fighting ambitions?" "Actually, I think it helps," Danny said thoughtfully. "Having someone in my life who understands strategic thinking and long-term planning makes me more focused on my professional development. You've already made me think more seriously about life after fighting, about building something sustainable for the future." Margaret felt a warm glow of satisfaction at the idea that she was contributing positively to Danny's growth and development. In her previous relationships, she had often felt that her professional success and independence were seen as obstacles to overcome rather than assets to celebrate. As the evening drew to a close, Margaret realized that her decision was already made, though she hadn't consciously acknowledged it until this moment. Despite all the logical reasons to maintain distance, despite the potential complications and social judgments they might face, she was going to take the risk of exploring this unexpected connection. "Danny," she said as they prepared to leave the coffee shop, "would you like to have dinner with me this weekend? Somewhere nice, as a real date?" Danny's smile was radiant. "I would love that more than anything." As they walked to their cars in the gentle Seattle rain, Danny took Margaret's hand with a naturalness that felt both thrilling and comfortable. For the first time in years, Margaret felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, with exactly the right person, despite the fact that nothing about their situation fit conventional expectations. "Margaret," Danny said as they reached her car, "I know this is all uncertain and complicated. But I want you to know that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. Whatever challenges we face, I think what we have is worth exploring." Margaret looked up at him, this young man who had somehow managed to see past her carefully constructed professional persona to the woman underneath who was hungry for adventure and genuine connection. "I think so too," she said softly. Their first kiss happened naturally, without the awkwardness Margaret had anticipated. Danny's hands were gentle as they framed her face, and his lips were soft and warm against hers. For a moment that lasted both forever and, not nearly long enough, Margaret forgot about age differences and social expectations and professional reputations. She forgot about everything except the feeling of being truly seen and genuinely cherished by someone who valued her exactly as she was. As she drove home that night, Margaret realized that her life had just taken a turn she never could have predicted or planned. For the first time in decades, she was embarking on something without a clear roadmap or guaranteed outcome. She was choosing to follow her heart into unknown territory, trusting that love might indeed be worth the risk of stepping outside society's carefully drawn lines about who belonged with whom. At 50 years old, Margaret Chen was discovering that it's never too late to surprise yourself, never too late to choose courage over caution, and never too late to believe that the heart knows things that logic cannot calculate. Her love story was just beginning, and, for the first time in years, she had no idea where it would lead, and that felt like the most exciting possibility of all.